I'm Nicola Stevens. I'm Professor of Public Health and Director of Postgraduate Programs here in the School of Medicine. Welcome to you all. My responsibility also includes the Healthcare and Remote and Extreme Environments courses, which is very relevant to tonight's topics. So welcome to this really unique seminar where we have a really wonderful panel of people who are going to talk to us about human spaceflight. Thank you to all of you in the room for attending on this kind of chilly Hobart night, and thank you to everyone who's joined us online as well, including from two of our Antarctic bases. So we've got rooms full of people dialing in from Antarctica. So welcome to you all. A bit of housekeeping before we get going. For those in the room, emergency exits are at the back of the room and to this side of the room. Our gathering point, if we had to exit the building, is the Rose Garden, which is found through the underpass when we exit the building. Toilets are located through where you came in and up the orange corridor. Just look for the orange corridor, can't miss it. And for those online, we will be taking questions via the chat room. So if you could pop your questions in the chat when we get to that section of it. I also note that Minister Madeleine Ogilvie might be joining us, but Parliament's sitting today. She's hoping to, and she may join and come into the back of the room at some stage. So just alerting you that that might happen during the evening. And before we go any further, we acknowledge the Pakua and Palawa people of Lutruwita, the traditional owners of the land where we live and work. We pay respects to elders past and present who hold memories, knowledge and culture that spans millennia. I acknowledge the Pada Emma people, on whose land my own home sits, and who were the largest Aboriginal group in Tasmania at the time of European settlement. I acknowledge with deep respect their care of the land on which I live for tens of thousands of years. So it's my absolute pleasure to introduce to you Dr. John Cherry, who is our panel chair for tonight's discussion. We're lucky to have John as one of our lecturers, along with Dr. Alicia Tucker, on our Humans in Space course that's taught here as part of our Healthcare and Remote and Extreme Environments suite of courses. John is also the Deputy Chief Medical Officer at the Australian Antarctic Division, a member of the Centre for Antarctic Remote and Maritime Medicine, and the Vice President of the Australasian Society of Aerospace Medicine. So a great lead for our panel tonight, and thank you, John, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Nicola, and thank you for joining us here in Hobart for what I think is a pretty special event and a really great opportunity to talk through not only the opportunities for Australia, but also the opportunities and the work that's being undertaken here in Tasmania, and particularly here in Hobart, which is a real centre of excellence for human spaceflight within Australia. Over the last few days, we've been hosting the Humans in Space course here in Hobart, which is a face-to-face component of the course that Nicola mentioned there for the Healthcare in Remote and Extreme Environments program. As part of that, we have a faculty of experts from across Australia and around the world who've joined us to teach on that course. And we're extremely lucky to have many of them here in the room tonight who are going to be part of the panel. So without further delay, if I could please ask my panellists to come up and grab a chair. And what we'll do is there should be microphones available to each panellist, and we're just going to go through one at a time, and I'll ask the panellists to introduce themselves. You can see some brief information on the screen there, but probably doesn't do it justice because we really do have an expert panel here. So Eric, I might throw to you if you could just give us a bit of an introduction.
Sure. My name's Eric Phillips. Happy to be back here in Tassie, previous resident for almost 20 years. I trained as a teacher in Adelaide, worked in outdoor education for many years, and then started my own company, Ice Trek, and have guided expeditions to the ends of the earth, North Pole, South Pole, which I've visited almost 30 times or so, a couple of times across Greenland, skiing about 10,000 kilometres, hauling a sled behind me. Sounds really silly, but, you know, small brain, whatever, cold temperatures, place to go. and was very lucky to have been invited into space on a mission that was completed earlier this year.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jimmy Wu. I'm an assistant professor at Baylor College of Medicine and also the deputy director and chief engineer for the Translational Research Institute for Space Health, or TRISH for short. And prior to joining TRISH and Baylor College of Medicine, I worked at NASA Johnson Space Center supporting medical operations and also human research program as well. So happy to be here in Tasmania, first time here. I'm enjoying it. So thank you for your hospitality.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. I'm Rihanna Bokhari. I'm also at Baylor College of Medicine, the Center for Space Medicine, and I'm the scientific research director at TRISH. My background is in space radiation and musculoskeletal loss, and really excited to be in Australia for the first time.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alicia Tucker. I'm a Tasmanian and a UTAS graduate, very proud of both of those things. I work at the Royal Hobart Hospital in the diving and hyperbaric unit. I've got about a 20-year history in extreme environment medicine, including outback and polar, and the last 10 years in aviation and space medicine, which led me to the career here in the diving and hyperbaric unit. So very, very happy to chat with anyone or be available as a local contact should anyone want to know any more information.
Hi, I'm Jay Bunke. I'm a professor of medicine at the Geisel School of Medicine at Dartmouth. I flew on the Space Shuttle Neurolab mission in 1998, and I have a long-standing interest in space physiology and medicine. First time in Tasmania. Great to be here.
So as you can see from the panel, a really wonderful assortment of very experienced individuals. We're going to do a bit of a panel discussion and then we'll have some opportunity for questions at the end. Jay, I might start with this question with you, if that's okay. We know that space missions are expensive and there are many pressing problems here on Earth. Why press ahead with expensive space missions, noting that there's other problems here on the Earth's surface?
Because they're amazing. So I was just thinking that have you seen a picture, let's say, from like the Hubble Space Telescope or the Webb Space Telescope, and you look at that and you go, wow, that's incredible. You don't say, why are we spending money on this, right? You realize the amazement of it and what it represents in terms of our human achievement. So I think it's really remarkable. But to be more practical, if we think about our daily life right now, the things we do, like with our smartphones all the time, we're connecting to satellites for our GPS. Again, satellites, product of the space program, the rockets and the technology that got those satellites there. The little chips inside the phones were things that were really driven by the space program and also by military things as well. So this was all technology that was driven and pushed forward by a desire to challenge these frontiers. And so I think if you're always doing things, thinking of it has to have some near-term practical output, you're shortchanging your future. Because if you don't plan for the future, it's not going to happen, right? The fact that we live in the things that we have today are a consequence of the investments that were made in the past. And it's sort of our obligation to continue to do that, so there'll be more in the future. That's how I view it.
Thanks, Jay. So we're kind of talking about why human spaceflight is important. And Jimmy, I might throw to you. We've spoken about, that there's benefits over the course of this week. We've spoken about benefits for astronaut health and some of the work that we're doing. What sort of benefits serve the people here on Earth with the research that's being undertaken in space at the moment?
Yeah, just to tack onto what Jay was saying with regards to what is the benefit when we go to an extreme environment, especially space flight. We know it is hazardous to the body. And so our approach to solve those problems drives innovation. And so I always use as sort of a theme when I look at a problem in space flight is if it's a problem for humanity on Earth, it's going to be a problem for humanity in space because it's still a human going to space. And so if we can solve and keep someone healthy in space flight, we should be able to do the same thing on Earth, anywhere on Earth. And so I like to look at space as a forcing function to drive that innovation, drive that discovery and technology, drive that understanding of how to keep someone healthier, drive a way to produce food in the austere and remote environments of space. How does that technology get transferred back to Earth to serve our communities that are underserved here on the planet? So that's how I look at it. That's how I think addressing human spaceflight can eventually also address our needs here on the planet.
So we're sort of talking about some of the challenges with spaceflight, and those who might have watched some of the movies of astronauts in space might have some familiarity with some of those challenges. Alicia, I might throw to you. Could you tell us a bit more about the medical challenges associated with human spaceflight?
Yeah, well, I think that any extreme environment is going to throw human physiology a few curveballs, and space has a few of its own unique maladies. I think in particular, microgravity is probably the one physiologic challenge that really leads to a whole world of consequences physiologically from the moment we go into a microgravity or a zero, what other people would describe as zero gravity, but it's essentially a form of weightlessness. But when we go into space, and Eric was mentioning this, there's a phenomenon called space motion sickness, you know. So as soon as people go into space, there's about a 75% chance that they're going to feel not well, and that's because microgravity is wreaking havoc on our vestibular system, as well as fluid shifts that are going to cause some cardiovascular challenges. And then as we spend longer times in space, we're going to have bone and muscle loss, as well as other phenomena that occur as a result of being in that weightless environment. Then tack a little curveball again of things like radiation. So at the moment, we're under a nice protection, I suppose you could say, or embrace of the magnetosphere and the atmosphere of our Earth. But as we go beyond that protection, we're going to be exposing our bodies to massive amounts of radiation. So we have to have come up with solutions that can help us to manage those sorts of things. So there's quite a few, but particularly radiation, microgravity, and then the isolation of being away from the proximity of Earth is going to be, they're probably the biggest challenges that we face.
Thanks, Alicia. I'm aware we've got two astronauts on the panel. So Eric, I might throw to you. We're talking about some of the challenges that occur, with human spaceflight. You obviously recently flew on the FRAM-2 mission in the SpaceX FRAM-2 mission. Could you talk us through some of the sort of biggest medical challenges you had or your crew had during your mission?
Yeah, sure. And that was part of our training and learning during all of the time that we spent at Los Angeles at SpaceX HQ. From the medical team. So we're well aware of the kind of challenges that we would have up there. I guess the first one, well, preemptively, I guess one of the issues that we need to deal with is, well, how do we go to the toilet? So initially, in fact, I was just telling the story to Jimmy that, or yourself, sorry, that, during our training program, we would be in our seat with a diaper, right? Because you need to kind of soak up anything that comes out, and you're sitting there often for hours during your training. And it's like, yeah, this is going to hold everything. And suddenly you realize that because you're in this reclined position, it's like, nope, that ain't holding. No, it's running down my back. Oh, it's down by my shoulders now, crikey. So by the time we did fly, like 3 layers of diaper and all of this other padding and stuff, which worked really well, I have to say. And then you dispose of that in the waste locker once you're up in space. I was also telling the story about in the earlier era of the space shuttle, I think maybe the Apollo era, is that they had a different strategy. They would, rather than using diapers, they had a bag that they would strap to their leg and a condom that would go over them for the guys and a hose connecting the two. And they had multiple leaks all the time. And it's like, what is going on here? We can't quite work it out. Well, it's because there was a small, medium, and large, and no guy is ever going to say that he's a small. So they changed it to medium, large, and extra large, and the problem was solved. But for us, we certainly experienced nausea. So space motion sickness, we could medicate for that. 3 of the 4 of us suffered that over the course of about 48 hours, some more than others. One of us also suffered just before descent and also on splashdown too. And of course, we would deal with that with emesis bags or vomit bags that we would vomit into and very quickly close up, so none of that would go into the atmosphere of the Crew Dragon capsule. Headaches that we could medicate for too. And actually, just going back on one of the emesis events, is that one crew member actually choked very, very severely. Platter eyes, red in the face, blue, like a really serious situation. And being the medical officer and feeling like I was a bit of a Superman anyway, I was down at the cargo bay, and of course you fly, and it's like poop, and I just go zhup and fly through space and slammed her on the back 5 or 6 times, and that actually released whatever was choking. I think just maybe a bubble from the vomiting, and that managed to release it, and she recovered very, very quickly.
Thanks, Eric. Rihanna, I might throw to you for the next question. As you know, we obviously, the Australian Antarctic Division and the Polar Medicine Unit within the Australian Antarctic Division have a close partnership with TRISH, and we're running a number of research studies in Antarctica that looking to address some of these medical challenges that we've mentioned recently on the panel. But just for the benefit of those in the room and those online, could you just tell us what is TRISH?
Sure, yeah. TRISH is the Translational Research Institute for Space Health. We are a partnership with the NASA Human Research Program to conduct, to fund research that is high impact, disruptive, a little bit outside of the normal. We're supposed to do things that are a little bit riskier than normal, than the standard risk reduction approach that NASA takes. And so one of the ways that we do that is by reaching out to other places and developing relationships that help us to approach the real risks of spaceflight in a new way. And so our partnership with the Australian Antarctic Division is a great way for us to approach some serious risks that we have to human spaceflight, like isolation and distance from Earth, especially for autonomous healthcare that we'll definitely need when we start going to Mars for 3-year missions.
Thanks, Rihanna. And Jimmy, TRISH has a couple of, I think, pretty exciting programs at the moment, the Expand program and Hermes. Would you be able to tell those assembled what those 2 programs are?
Sure, so I'll start with the Expand program, which really came out, to Rihanna's point, we had a unique opportunity with understanding with the emergence of commercial spaceflight in 2021. Those of us saw probably the sort of the suborbital race between Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin, but around that time we had worked a partnership with SpaceX, understanding that there was the first orbital mission that was being planned, that was then announced as Inspiration 4, and we were able to, with NASA's support, take a look at would a commercial spaceflight platform using the Crew Dragon be a viable platform for doing human research, because it wasn't known. We took the risk to understand that, and we proved through that pilot that it was successful, and thus we grew the Expand program out of that to be able to support human research in such a way we could collect the data on commercial astronauts and make those data available to stakeholders, whether it's the commercial launch companies themselves. They want to understand how their customers are doing spaceflight, to space agencies, and I think more importantly, probably the scientific community. Is those of you, I don't know, if have ever done a data request through NASA's databases, biomedical databases, it can be very challenging and very time consuming for those data sets to become available to the community. And so we, like I said, that was an organization I worked with before, and so we took a lot of the lessons learned about data release and tried to take the lessons learned from that and apply it to the commercial spaceflight cohort. And and then from there we grew, and fortunately we were able to get Eric and his crewmates to be part of Expand as well. So that's the Expand program. And then Hermes, and both of these have acronyms, which I don't ever remember, even though we came up with them. But Hermes came out of understanding as we developed the Expand program, we started recognizing that, okay, SpaceX is not the only commercial launch company. There was, like I said, Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin. We knew Axiom Space was intending to do their first mission to dock with the International Space Station. And we also knew other companies were also interested. And when I looked at the potential vehicles each company was developing, I realized that there was going to be no common way that they were going to take care of a human in spaceflight. And then when NASA already at that time had announced their plan to return back to the moon with the Artemis program, similar thing there. If you have studied that, they have multiple vehicles to try to go from Earth to the moon, and then there's going to be a space station that orbits the moon called the Gateway, and then from there they would get into another vehicle called the Human Landing System that would go down to the surface of the moon. So you're already talking right there, 3 different vehicles, all with 3 different likely capabilities to take care of an astronaut. And so what we came up with the Hermes program, which it is an acronym, but we actually find that named after the Greek deity, who Hermes is actually the protector of the passenger, the traveler. And so we felt it was appropriate of the name that we are trying to protect the health of someone that's going through space, that's traveling through space. And so it is a comprehensive data management system that allows for integration of all the data we need to understand health and performance for an astronaut in spaceflight, so that we can make the best medical decision to take care of them. And I could keep going about what we're trying to do with it, but I think that's a good summary to understand what we're doing with the Expand and Hermes.
Thanks, Jimmy. Noting that we're sitting in one of the world's Antarctic gateway cities with a proud history and heritage of supporting Antarctic exploration, Jay, I might throw this question to you. How does work in Antarctica help with space exploration?
Yeah, so with Antarctica, you have something that can serve as an analog, something that's kind of like spaceflight in certain respects. And one key respect is the idea that you have a small group of people who are living and working together in an isolated and confined environment. And usually that can go pretty well, but sometimes it doesn't, both either in Antarctica or in space. One example, there was an expedition called the International Biomedical Expedition to Antarctica. I was back in the early 80s. And they chose scientists from around the world to come to Antarctica for a winter over. And this was a great achievement for all of them, right? Because this is something they wanted to do. It was interesting for their career. And they were going to spend this winter over in Antarctica doing this scientific work that they've always wanted to do. But what's really interesting is if you read the report of the psychologist after they came back, the report says none of them found the experience to be enjoyable. Not because of because it was cold or because it was hardship. It was just because of the other people. So just the relationships were enough to torpedo this thing which was supposed to be the pinnacle of their career. So that can happen in space, and it has. And of course, this is an extreme example because they didn't really select these people or have them work together or anything beforehand. So it's a little bit predictable that happened. But maintaining people in an isolated, confined environment in Antarctica is very similar to what it takes to maintain people in an isolated, confined environment in space.
Thanks, Jay. Eric, your FRAM2 flight was the first flight to have a particular polar orbit. Could you just talk us through, I mean, that's an achievement in itself, but obviously you have a pretty distinguished exploration track record as well in the Arctic and the Antarctic. Can you just talk us through the similarities and differences between polar expeditions and the FRAM2 polar orbit?
Sure, yeah. The starkest difference, of course, is the incredible amount of technology that's embedded in spaceflight. And this pyramid of people, of thousands of people below that pinnacle mission that's up there flying into space, it relies implicitly on those people. And without certain aspects of those groups of people, it just simply wouldn't happen. Whereas a polar expedition, of course, it would you would be delivered to the edge of Antarctica, for example, with a pilot and an aircraft and comms, back to the base camp. But once you're there, you're out on your own. It's you, it's your team, it's your equipment. If you've forgotten the stove, if you land there and you've forgotten the stove and the plane's going, that's it. You, at some point, need to call that plane back, and you kind of done your expedition because you've paid already for that flight. You don't pay for a second one. And I had a lot of troubles at the beginning because I was slated to be in the co-pilot seat. And for me, for 2 weeks of training, my first 2 weeks of training there at SpaceX, I was totally redlining every day, completely out of my, beyond my limits of capability, because here I am supposedly to be co-pilot. I have no aviation background, no aeronautical background, no computer programming. I don't know anything about state machines. I'm not an engineer. I'm not even a programmer. And here I am having to go 10 layers deep into this system to repair or diagnose a broken electrical string and try to circumvent that to fix. It's like, what? You want me to do what? It's like, I cannot do that. So then I was put into seat number 4, which is mission specialist, which is the guy who reacts to emergencies. I'm the guy who puts my suit on first and then fights the fire, or plugs up, not literally plugging up a hole, but deals with an emergency deorbit event because we've been hit by a small amount of debris. But it took a while for me to understand how I could correlate space flight with my expeditions in Antarctica. And it wasn't until the trainer prompted me to find similarities between the two that it really started to make sense. And after a long bit of thought, I thought to myself, well, an emergency deorbit requires the vehicle to be packed very quickly. And if you look at a comparison, it's a ship at sea or a sailing boat at sea that's about to be hit by a hurricane. And if you've got plates and bowls and pots and kettles and all of that kind of stuff lying around and you're about to be hit by a massive storm, you know what's going to happen there. If you're not tethered to that boat, something drastic's going to happen. Until I started thinking about it that way, it was all kind of confusing. And of course, the other similarity is, I've spent many, many nights inside a blizzard-bound tent where it's just you and 3 or 4 people, and your head might be that far from someone's bum who's going to the toilet in the vestibule just over there. There's like a lot of similarities in space there as well. So until I stepped out of my comfort zone or found ways to find correlations and differences, it was all kind of crazy for me, but eventually I found my place.
Thanks, Eric. We're certainly talking about Antarctica as a space analogue being an environment that's similar to spaceflight, but here on Earth, so small groups in isolation for extended periods of time, dependent on technology for survival, chronic low-grade stress, changes in circadian rhythm. I say all that noting that we have Davis Station and Casey Station joining us online, and I welcome both of them to the event tonight. Throwing to Rihanna, we obviously talking about the way that Antarctica can help support human spaceflight. Can you talk us through some of the studies that Trish has partnered in collaboration with the Australian Antarctica Division on to facilitate that aim?
Yeah, sure. And so thank you for joining us today on this call, because we thank you for the stations that are on, for all of the work that you've been doing to help us with these studies. So one study that is particularly interesting is looking at just-in-time training. And that's something that we think of when we're thinking of autonomous healthcare. So when you don't necessarily have the doctor that you want to go to at all, the specialty that you need to go to for a particular thing, you might need an ultrasound, and you can't go to a sonographer, but someone has to do that ultrasound because you are, months away from Earth and you need to figure out what's wrong. And so you need to have a just-in-time training protocol and figure out if that protocol works and if a layperson can do it, because guess what? The medical officer could be the one that's sick. and maybe they're the one that's trained or has some capability, but they're not the one that's able to do it. So you might have to just in time train someone. So that was one project that we've worked on with AAD. Another project was focused on, understanding body composition without something like a DEXA. So using unobtrusive measurements of body composition. And so that can be a great useful thing in a rural or remote environment. So it's great for us in space, but also in remote environments, you can't usually bring something as big as a DEXA scanner, which can help you track someone's health over time. And so those are some tools that some projects we've been working on. One last project that I'll talk about is focused on isolation and confinement, and this isolation aspect that's really important in the extreme environment of the Australian and Arctic division. We have some work that's focused on looking at cognition and physiological monitoring, and then pairing that with an unobtrusive way to test whether someone's ready to do their duty. So this is like a readiness for duty, testing your fatigue and cognitive load. And so we're looking at understanding whether that type of tool can also give us the same kind of information that we're getting from a more robust cognitive tool that's been used for a while. So
we're sort of talking about some of the health challenges, and Australia is well placed in a number of health aspects, particularly our rural and remote medical practice, the links through the Australian College of Rural and Remote Medicine, and other links with the Royal Flying Doctor Service, for example. Alicia, I might throw to you for this question. Does Australia currently have the capability to look after sovereign astronauts?
Short answer, no. However, we have a lot of history being involved, as you were sort of remarking then, with the RFDS and with the AAD, etc. So in terms of when an astronaut goes to space, they have a doctor who is kind of nominally assigned to them, although it's all part of a massive team, and they're called flight surgeons. And the flight surgeons aren't just there to be kind of their GP on call while they're on mission. They're involved from the moment an astronaut gets assigned a mission all the way through post-mission, where they're doing rehabilitation, etc., and they're all part of a collaborative team. Yes, they will be involved with on-mission acute emergency support, as well as making sure that they're checking in on a weekly basis to make sure, particularly from a psychological perspective, people are doing okay. In terms of the way that these kind of individuals usually get trained, certainly the larger agencies often take their pool of flight surgeons from people who've undertaken specific aerospace medicine residency programs. And we unfortunately don't have a space medicine training program, but it's something that we are trying to evolve. Plug, come and do some space medicine at the health and the remote and extreme environments. Saying that, there is a lot of skills that can be translated from other fields that can be applied within the space flight environment. So yes, there is a need to understand the physics and physiology of what happens to the human body, but a lot of the skills, particularly that we have acquired here in Australia, in terms of our ability to think outside the square, whether or not it's wilderness medicine, whether or not it's outback, polar, even just regional town medicine. We've actually got really, really good setups here in Australia, and our ability to it's the can-do attitude as well, which I think that are all really positive traits that will then allow us, and I don't want to use the term, but launch forward into creating a sovereign program, because we are, at the moment, we have Catherine Bennell-Pegg, who is our Australian flag trained astronaut, and she's the first, okay? So yes, she's potentially a career astronaut. However, we're going to have a lot more kind of commercial astronauts that are going to be coming through, who may only be flying single missions. So there are some of the commercial agencies who are trying to take people who maybe have managed, risk assessed, and looked after people in the extreme environments, including here in Australia, and then allow us to be able to undertake individual sort of training with the various agencies. But it's very much something that we're trying to achieve. And I think that we kind of I think that there is an umbrella of training that just really just needs a name change. But I think otherwise, I think that's the skills and the ability for us to be able to be excellent astronauts, flight surgeons is already there.
Yeah, thanks, Alicia. I think it's important to note there's not only unique skills and opportunities within Australia, but specifically here in Tasmania as well. We might come back to some of those later on, particularly with the hyperbaric unit and the Pegasus Envirolab there. Before we talk about that though, Jay, I might throw to you. I mean, you've literally written a textbook on space physiology. You know your way around that subject very well. What makes studying, what happens to the body in space interesting? And in your flight, what did you notice about how your body reacted to microgravity?
Oh, so I got a lot of detailed insight into my reaction to weightlessness because our mission was totally devoted to studying the brain and nervous system and how it adapts to weightlessness and to readapt to being on Earth. So we had 26 experiments from around the US and around the world, all focused on the brain and nervous system. So one thing I can say about one thing that I noticed that I thought was amazing is, if you spin in a chair, right, and you're right, you don't see that you're spinning, but you just feel that you're spinning. If you're spinning in a chair, you've got the spinning of the chair is going this way, gravity is going down, and what you actually feel like is you feel like you're tilted 45 degrees. So even though you're sitting up, you feel like you're tilted 45 degrees. And when you're spinning in this chair, and that's how it was for us before. That's how it was for us before the mission. So what should happen in weightlessness? We still got this thing going on, right? So you still have the gravity from the chair, but how about the gravity from Earth? That's gone, right? So we should feel like we're lying on our side, right? You should feel like you're tilting all the way over. So we knew this was supposed to happen. The first time we got in the chair, it was a few days into the mission, fired it up, started spinning, 45 degrees. Oh, wow, that's disappointing. I was looking forward to the feeling like you're lying on your side thing, that we heard about in training. So, but then we didn't do it just once, we did it again then several days later. And sure enough, fire the thing up, start spinning, and you feel like you're all the way over on your side. So yes, it did change, but there was this adaptive process that's going on in the background, which is the same kind of adaptive process that makes us deal with a lot of different situations. People who have balance problems on Earth are going through these adaptive processes, as they try to rewire their brain to deal with what's going on. So that was one thing I noticed on the mission. As far as space physiology in general, when I was on the mission, I thought we kind of really knew, what the effects of gravity were on the body. Well, come to find out that then some years after that, we get these reports that there are long-duration astronauts who are noticing visual changes in space, that all of a sudden they're having difficulty seeing things up close. And then they do some examination, some scans of the head, and it looks like their eye is getting a little bit shorter. That's pretty unusual. And that turned out that's got to be a unique effect of weightlessness. And here we've been going in space since 1961, and only after that period of time where we started to see that happening. Another thing that's been happening is some long-duration astronauts who develop a clot in the vein in their neck. I don't know if I can express how rare it is for somebody who's normal to show up with a clot in the vein in their neck. That's not something that just happens day to day. If you go down to the emergency room and ask the doctors if they've ever seen anybody who's normal roll in with a clot in the vein in the neck, that's just not something that happens. And yet here it is happening in space. So it turns out that there's a lot of interesting things going on with just the removal of gravity that we don't fully understand. Keeps me engaged. And I think that's, it's very interesting to try to figure out how does weightlessness affect the body, and can we understand it better?
And how that is going to evolve with going to 1/6 gravity on the moon.
Yeah, right.
And then if we go beyond.
1/3 on the Mars. Yeah.
That's a perfect segue into my next question, which was, we're currently talking about operations in low Earth orbit, relatively easy to return to Earth, relatively easy to return to Earth, availability for real-time support. But obviously a lunar mission or a Mars mission is Mars in particular, much more isolated. Rihanna, I might throw to you and ask, specific to long-duration spaceflight, thinking about a Mars mission paradigm, what are some of the biggest challenges that humans who are going to Mars are going to experience?
Yeah, thanks. So one of the biggest risks that we have going to Mars is isolation and confinement. I mean, just think putting yourself in a tin can with a couple other people for 3 years. And that's essentially what we're talking about. And all of us experienced COVID, and so we know that there were some, everybody went through it in their own way, right? But we all learned something from that. And I think that tells us that this could have issues. And so I think that isolation and confinement and maintaining that behavioral mental stability during that time is going to be a big challenge. Obviously, radiation is going to be a big challenge, and I'm happy to answer questions about the specific differences between the radiation in space and here on Earth. But to suffice it to say, the radiation in space is different, and it's continuous, and we can't shield against it. So it's going to be there, and we'll have to figure out what that means for how it impacts our bodies. And that may just mean an increased risk of cancer, or it could mean some other types of changes that could happen. And we won't know that now because there's really no way for us to study it here fully. So then changes to autonomous healthcare will be a really important aspect of this as well. So that distance from Earth, we'll have a communication delay of up to 20 minutes each way when we get close to Mars. And there also are blackout periods of communication delay. And so the paradigm that we use currently to function and provide healthcare is really reliant on talking to mission control. And that's going to be a real challenge when we go to Mars, because we need to change the way we deliver healthcare. And so I think that's actually one reason why we really are excited about our collaboration with AAD, because they have a single physician model. And that's a single physician that's caring for all those individuals at a station. And the goal is to stay and play, is what John calls it. And I think it's a great way to say this, because you can't escape. You're not leaving. So we have to figure out how to keep you healthy in that environment. And I think figuring out how to do that without obviously constantly talking to mission control will be another major risk.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's, one of the advantages of the Australian Antarctic program as a space analogue is that 9 months of extended over winter isolation. So, a stay and play as opposed to a scoop and run approach. A medical evacuation in summer for us would be a comparable timeline to a medical evacuation from the surface of the moon. A medical evacuation in winter, which isn't logistically feasible, is more comparable to a medical evacuation from the surface of Mars. So there's a lot of capability there within the Australian Antarctic program and the Polar Medicine Unit. I note, though, that we're not the only organisation in Hobart that's contributing to this field. Obviously, the Centre for Antarctic Remote and Maritime Medicine has a number of links across a number of areas. The University of Tasmania hosts the Humans in Space course as well. But Alicia, I might throw to you because there's some really exciting work happening at the Royal Hobart Hospital with the Pegasus Enviro Lab. I'm wondering if you can tell us more about that and the future direction and future opportunities.
Because I couldn't just become a flight surgeon, Once I got inspired by the space bug, I ended up at the Neutral Buoyancy Lab in Houston, where they've got the big mock-up of the space station and they do the spacewalk training. And that's when I realised, diving in hyperbaric, I can actually do that as an Australian, but then, it's like fate should have it. Our department that was being built in the new K block just over the road was not going to have just a hyperbaric chamber, it was going to have a dual capable hyper and hypobaric chamber. And all of a sudden it's like, I don't know, it's fate, whatever you want to call it. So I ended up doing the Diving and Hyperbaric Fellowship in 2019, and that has allowed me to have access to what is a very unique facility. So our facility is it's one of only about half a dozen dual-capable hyper and hypobaric chambers in the world, the only one in the southern hemisphere. And where that is uniquely capable and where that is really useful is when you go into an altitude environment, particularly if you go there quickly or you decompress from sea level pressure through to a lower pressure, you can also get decompression sickness, so the bends. So it's not just scuba divers that get decompression sickness, but it's also, for example, astronauts who are going from living inside a space station into being inside a spacesuit. So you can't just jump in a spacesuit and go out the airlock. You have to go through a decompression program. And that pre-breathe protocol can be anything from 3 hours through to 24 hours. And so we need to learn, a little bit more about how our body responds and how we can develop pre-breathe protocols to protect our astronauts from getting decompression sickness, because they would be exposed to that potential malady when they're doing their active work. So when they're actually going on a spacewalk. And that is, if you have to interrupt a mission because someone gets the bends and you have to recompress them back down to sea level, that will interfere with that EVA. And that can be as important as doing things like repairing a Canadarm on the space station, which is needed to capture a resupply module. So let alone what could happen if you're actually doing activities on the moon and you may be far away from a habitat. So what we're doing with the Pegasus Lab is it's the Physiology of Extreme Geographic Aerospace and Undersea Environments Laboratory. And so we'll be using the dual capable chamber to be able to do things like altitude physiology training, which means that we can expose people to altitude, but because we have the hyperbaric side of things, it means that if we accidentally bend people during the whole research and training side of things, we can actually just recompress people and then kind of say, please don't tell anyone, and yes, the ethics was approved, and you did sign a consent form. But the additional part of that is our old hyperbaric chamber is now being re-engineered so that we can turn it into a spacecraft analog environment. And the hope is to do some isolation studies, as well as to be able to put a vacuum pump onto that chamber to be able to potentially have an opportunity to explore exploration atmospheres, as well as potentially hard vacuum to do things like spacesuit testing. So, a little island on the bottom end of the world, and there's the work with the AAD, there's the work with the Extreme Environments course, and now we've got our own way that we can contribute to the space program without being flight surgeons. So lots to see.
Thanks, Alicia. I'm certainly struck by, I think we punch above our weight when it comes to the capabilities that we have as a state, and particularly here in Hobart. You reflect on the decades of collaboration that the Australian Antarctic Division has had with NASA since the early 1990s, the more recent collaboration with Trish that we're proud to partner with as collaborators, we've got the chamber, we've got the program here at UTAS. It's a really wonderful example of opportunities within the sector, but also how Australia is utilising our unique capabilities and our strengths to support human spaceflight moving forward. We'll throw to questions in a moment, so get your thinking caps on. If you've got burning questions, we'll take questions within the room and also online as well. But before we do, Jimmy, I'll throw to you for one last question before we go to the floor. Obviously, we're talking about a new era of spaceflight where there's commercial operations as well as government-funded operations as well. What have you learned that's different between public-funded human spaceflight and commercial spaceflight?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question because I think this is kind of an opportunity to sit on both sides of this, where you have different really risk-tolerant positions for both, whether it's publicly funded or privately funded. Public funded is supported by the taxpayer base, and the assets, the astronauts that are part of that program are for the people that have provided support for it. So there's a much more risk aversion to that because you have to protect the national asset. On the private side, you've got astronauts that of means or of fortune that are able to go into space. However, the private model is for profit. And so that's an interesting deviation between the two. And because of that for-profit nature, they tend to be more risk tolerant and will take risks that would not be acceptable with other programs. And so this is now sort of this next chapter of human spaceflight where we may see some really interesting advancements because of that. And we've already seen that even not on the human spaceflight side, but just even the human transport side with SpaceX taking the investment, taking the risk to to develop reusable rockets, so that lowers the total cost of sending payloads and sending it into space. You're not building a whole new rocket every single time you go into space. You're reusing it over and over again. Just like, if you were to fly from Hobart to Sydney, that plane isn't going to get destroyed when you go to Sydney. They reuse that plane for the next mission. So that's the model that SpaceX pioneered. And so I think you're going to see a lot of this still. We're hoping that we can do this with human research as well. This is why we had worked on the EXPAND program to facilitate that. How can we get this data that's going to be collected with the increased number of subjects and participants that would go on commercial spaceflight? And I was fortunate enough to speak at the Humans in Space lecture earlier today, and our program's up to 47 subjects. And it's been a program that's 3 years in the making, 3.5 years in the making. So just that throughput of subjects enrolling is already exceeding what NASA is able to do with the public side. So I think that's a real important thing to look at is that risk tolerance to push advancements, push innovation, kind of in conjunction with the first question that was given to me. And the second part would be sort of the for-profit model. Those was in the scientific community and the engineering community, we use data to make decisions, right? How do we know it's safe? How do we know this is working? How do we know it's validated, right? In the for-profit model, it'll be interesting to see how money is factored into that decision-making. And so that's something we don't quite know yet. We're at the forefront of that, and I think it's something to keep in mind as the commercial spaceflight sector continues to mature, is how that starts playing into safety, particularly on the human health and performance side, which at the end of the day, if it's all about sending the general population into space, we have to make sure it's safe for everyone, not just safe for some. And we want to open access to everyone. It's not just the select few, but to provide that equity for all.
Thanks, Jimmy. So we might throw to the room here first to see if there are any questions. So if there are, please feel free to pop your hand up. And if we need to repeat the question for those online so they can hear, we can do that as well.
Question for Rihanna. My understanding is that you look into bone demineralization, microgravity, and you can exercise and never minimalize it, but it's permanent, is that when people come back, they never recover their full bone strength. Has anyone thought of centrifuging astronauts as they sleep? It was interesting to hear that when you spin people, they feel they're horizontal. Because I understand currently they're just strapped to the wall, and if you centrifuge them, you'd have an artificial gravity for a third of their time. So
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and you're right that bone loss is a real problem. But we're able to mitigate that loss majorly by doing heavy load exercise, basically using heavy loads, like weightlifting essentially, except it's a little different in space. But we've toyed with the concept of artificial gravity before for a long time. In centrifugation, you would need a really long arm, and I'll turn to Jimmy, the engineer in the room, to help me explain this, but you need a really long arm to make that centrifugation actually give you real 1G. And so even if you would need a much bigger station than we have to achieve this, I think, but I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, so I'll help provide the kind of the physics behind this is, Rihanna's right, we would need a really long moment arm to be able to, for two reasons. One is you would want the experience of the gravity at the longest point to be equal from your feet to your head. And so you could do a short arm centrifuge, but your feet might be at 1G, but then your head is maybe at 0.7G, I mean, depending. So there's a part of that is the length of the arm to do that. And the next part is you need to have that moment be slow enough that you're not also moving everything else within the vehicle. So you could do a faster rotation in order to get the artificial gravity you're looking for, but then what if something happens? You have to slow it. Maintenance. So you want the arm to be so long that the motion going around is slow enough that it isn't a challenge to the engineering of that vehicle. And so when you see sci-fi, they've got the big orbiting ring. That's why it's that big. And we've never built anything that big before in space flight. So that's the engineering challenge behind artificial gravity.
And just to add one more thing to that, and it's not that we couldn't ever do something like this. It's just that it costs too much. So it's a money issue.
Just before we take the next question, I'd like to acknowledge and welcome the Honourable Madeleine Ogilvie, MP, Minister for Innovation, Science and the Digital Economy, who's joined us today, and we're very grateful for her presence in the room. We'll look forward to hearing from you just before the end of the session. Are there any other questions in the room before we go to online?
Yeah, a question for Eric and for yourself, John. From both of your experience in Antarctica in summertime, we've heard about winter isolation. In summertime, for your deep field experience, what can we learn from deep field experience in altitude and that towards spaceflight?
Thanks, Eric. So I had the privilege of the summer just like the summer before to be the doctor and the field leader for the Australian Antarctic Traverse program, which is a journey 1,200 kilometres inland from Casey Station to an altitude of 3,300 metres to probably the most challenging, or certainly one of the most challenging environments on Earth, minus 40 degrees in summer, minus 80 degrees in winter. And the reason the Australian Antarctic program is going there is for the Million Year Ice Core project, which is a project to try and create an ice core that goes back more than 1 million years to create a fundamentally new understanding of climate science. So when snow accumulates on the surface, snow freezes into ice and it traps air at the point of freezing. And so what you can do is you can drill down, take a core, slice off some of that core, put it in a chamber back in Australia, and you can get a really hyper-accurate reading of what the concentration of the atmosphere was at that time. And that's going to fundamentally change our understanding of the climate and provide invaluable data for us to understand what's happening to the climate now and try and plan for the future. The reason I talk about that is it's a deep field expedition. It occurs in summer, but there are significant risks with it. There's increased isolation, there's increased autonomy. It's still focused on science, which is the prospect of spaceflight as well. There's many similarities there. We go to space for research and science, and that's why we're going on the inland traverse for the Million Year Ice Core project. But for me, I was really struck by the fact that it's probably, we spoke about space analogues earlier, it's probably the analogue that's closest to planetary exploration of another planetary body. So be that the moon, be that Mars. Now, of course, there's differences. You're not going to be having a 25 or 30-ton tractor on the moon or Mars, and I appreciate that. But there are many similarities in terms of traversing across the vast distances of Antarctica and looking at how we'll explore the Moon or Mars in the future. And I think it's an area that's really ripe for research and development to support that aim as well.
Yeah, I think one of the learnings from Deep Field is really what's happening in a team dynamics level, and all of the psychological and social things that are occurring within a small team when you're completely isolated from the normal things that we have in life that make life easy, and that when you need to rely on each other for support and for skills and information. And when I think about our, well, they call it extreme environment training, and this is something that, Apollo astronauts did back in the 60s and 70s. They would go climb mountains and do survival stuff in the deserts and all of that kind of stuff. That was twofold. One, because of the team dynamics and how they functioned as a team in those extreme environments, but also because the vehicle could potentially come down in the middle of nowhere, so they kind of had to learn survival in these various environments: jungle, desert, ocean, whatever. Yeah, that's...
Yeah, thanks, Eric. We might throw to online. Are there any questions in the chat?
Couple of questions. First one, what sort of experience would a potential Mars lunar doctor need?
Alicia, I might throw to you for that.
Yeah, so I suppose it kind of echoes a lot of the issues that we will probably have, like obviously just clinical assessment skills, etc. But like what happens in Antarctica, you're not just the doctor, you also then have to have a number of other hats that you'll likely end up wearing. So you have to clearly have the clinical skills, but it's also about being part of a team, about being flexible, about having the ability to work independently, problem solve. There's certainly no one going to be helping you put up a line or do an ECG. I think that it's that a person who ends up going to particularly Mars, anyone who goes into an extreme environment as the clinician or as the expedition team leader is going to be doing massive amounts of risk assessing, thinking about what are the most likely scenarios that we are going to face, and then planning accordingly. There's going to be a lot of work on prevention, so that would also include, as a clinician, doing things like looking after the nutrition, looking after water quality, those kind of preventative means, looking after group dynamics and working with your expedition team leader to be able to make sure that you're identifying whether there's any fractures within the group. So it's very much not going to be yeah, I can put a Band-Aid on that, or I can fix this problem, or I can identify that clinical issue. It's going to be very much that constellation of skills that you need to be able to work independently, be proactive, and then I think hopefully by all that hard work, you probably won't need to put that Band-Aid on or treat that condition because you've put in the hard work beforehand.
Terrific, thank you. The second question comes from one of our expeditioners on Davis Station, who asks, what concerns are there about cognitive decline in long-duration spaceflight, and are there any lessons from our studies in Antarctica?
That's an excellent question. Jimmy or Rihanna, do you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, sure. So we're obviously concerned that there might be cognitive declines when you go to Mars, and one of those reasons, we're not talking about something like someone having a massive decline, but you're talking about someone that may have, particularly something that stands out to me is that radiation could actually impact your brain in some ways, especially since we can't shield it. We don't know exactly what it will do. So, it could be something that is you couldn't control, completely out of your control. And you need to be able to identify if someone is having some sort of, even if it's a small decline in their capability to perform their job, and especially if it's mission critical. And so what I think would be very interesting is figuring out how to define, whether there is any sort of changes over time.
Yeah, and I would add the factor of stress, right? We see that we're all stressed in our day-to-day jobs, and it affects our performance. It affects our decision-making. And if you can imagine you're the first humans to ever go to Mars, the weight of the world is now on your shoulders. If you imagine how the Apollo 11 astronauts felt when they were the first humans to land on the moon, there's that kind of burden, that kind of stress to represent all of humanity as well. And so I think it's great that we have analogs like with the AAD to start understanding that burden, that stress burden of how people perform, even if it is these varying level of roles that you may have when you go to these analog environments. So this is a great place to start studying this.
Thank you. We're sort of running a little short on time. Some of our panel have got an early flight tomorrow, so I don't want to keep them up too late. But we've got time for probably one or two more questions from the room.
Thanks very much for all the information tonight. It's been great. My question is for Eric and Jay. Having been in space, how are you living your life differently now? And how do you see Earth and humanity now that you've been in space?
Yeah, this has been a complete pivot for me, and it came at a perfect time in life. I'm now 63, and I was tapering down from all the polar guiding. It's like I don't have any compulsion to wake up another night and attend at 30 degrees below zero, and then sort of motivate a team of novices to be on the ice for another day, 2 days, 3 weeks, 2 months. So it came at the perfect time. And now, being involved in the space sector, I've always been interested in space ever since I was a 7-year-old kid, sitting with my classmates in front of a grainy black and white television in the gym watching the moon landing. Ever since that time, I had this desire to replicate that somehow. I knew that I could never get into space. I knew that I could never get to the moon. So that's why I set about, learning about the wilderness, about the outdoors, and then trying to get to the ends of the earth, literally. Of course, it turns out that I did go to space, and that happened, I think, I thought about this afterwards, and I used to tell people that I won the lottery. And how it happened, that I was skiing with a customer of mine in Svalbard on an expedition, and he started talking about space, what it would be like to fly to the moon, to fly to Mars. And then in the next sentence, he said, well, I happen to be the first crypto billionaire. It's like, well, that's kind of pretty handy if you want to fly into space. And then 6 months later, I got the invitation from him by text, because you do that with breakups and, hookups and all that kind of stuff. Apparently, it also happens for being invited into space. A text on my phone, and I was about to fly to Antarctica, and I showed it to my daughter, and she confirmed, yep, you're going to space. So it has completely and absolutely changed my life. It came at the perfect time. And the other part of your question, when we were up in space and they first opened the nose cone, and you look through the cupola, which is this big perspex dome, and that when you've got your head up in there, you see all of Earth. You see the entire horizon. You can spin around in that cupola and you see all of Earth there in front of you. And I keep pointing up as if Earth's up there, whereas it's kind of flipped. You're up there and really we're looking down here. But the reason we do that, of course, is because we train and we're always standing or sitting in our seats, and we orient ourselves in the capsule that way. But once we're up there, we're of course flipped around and we're looking downwards, but it feels like the other way around. So it was a very profound moment for me to view Earth for the first time. I was moved to tears. And part of that is the overview effect. But the overview effect for me was very much the way Catherine explained it today during her digital presentation. and that it was, for me, just a deep affinity for Earth, for the universe and the laws that govern it, and that we need to look after this place. And later I processed it in the way that, well, here I am floating in this tin can, looking down at Earth, and you know that we are just people there on this planet and possibly the only life in the universe. With all of our know-how and capability, we have found no other sign of life. We don't know whether anything else exists out there. And if it's only us, observing it from up there, and you're saying that, well, here are these amazing humans down on this planet, and they have every skin color from dark through to white. They have every hair color from blonde through to black. They have every gender from male to female and everything in between. And how special are we to have those differences, and yet they can divide us as well? How stupid is that? That we put ourselves to war. We build walls, we build borders, and we engage with tariffs and all of those kinds of things. And if our world leaders could get themselves up there and see the world as Jay and I have had the opportunity to do so, things could be a little bit different.
Jay, could we get your thoughts as well?
Well, one thing I wasn't expecting is that I obviously became a lot smarter after I flew in space. So I guess it gave me a real appreciation for the possibilities, right? Because when you look at what we did, I mean, we flew on this space shuttle, we went into orbit, we did all these experiments, there were thousands of people working together. And so when people tell me that things aren't possible or can't be done, I say, oh yeah, they actually probably can. You know, that we really have tremendous ability to get things done if we want to focus on that. I think one gratifying thing about it is that it does, I had a very good experience recently that made me feel good about, you know, the future, is back at Dartmouth. Some time ago, we started a course called Life on Mars ? And it was all about Mars exploration, you know, what the Earth sciences of Mars, what's on Mars, what's the evidence for life on Mars, what does it take to get to Mars, some of the literature surrounding Mars. And we had a young woman take this course, and she was really into it. She also worked with our lab we did some parabolic flights, do some experimentation that she got really involved in. And I just found out this week that she's been accepted into the astronaut corps. So that was great. And I think that's the kind of thing that really made me feel good. You know, the idea that it's not just what we're doing, but the fact that we can bring it hopefully forward. You know, that the future is going to be even more amazing than what things are right now.
Thanks, Jay. We've probably got time for one more question from the room. Over here.
My question is that I've heard from some expeditioners that the trip down and the journey is quite moving in terms of it being a shared purpose. Suddenly you're with all of this expertise from around the world on a shared purpose and shared truth. From that psychological and isolation perspective in space, and jumping on what Eric said about that, what the hell are we doing on Earth? How are you, what are you working on to set the attitude that our expeditioners in Antarctica are carrying of that shared purpose and shared humanity? Antarctica is one of the few places where there hasn't been a war, where we are really pulling together to create great science. How and who is setting the attitude for space?
Who will start that one?
I can start us off, and if anyone else wants to jump in. So I think that's a really great question. I would say that the attitude, you know, if you talk to people in the space programs, people are very excited to support the mission. And the mission is getting humanity to Mars, getting humanity back to the moon. Like, you know, we may all come from individual countries, but our goal is moving mankind forward, and seeking that innovation for the benefit of everyone. And I think from all of us here, we probably all are interested in supporting that mission. But that's been my perspective in working in the space field, and I feel like it's probably shared amongst others.
Yeah, and I'll add that in the field we work in human research and spaceflight, space medicine, there are a lot of problems. Like going into space is very, very dangerous for the human body. And I'll be frank, there are not enough people working on these problems. And so what I would like to encourage the audience here is your enrollment in participating in that endeavor. And to your question, I think this may be, if we are able to advance, sustain, and thrive in space, that is probably one grand adventure for us as a species to overcome our differences and put our resources into going someplace that we are not built to survive in. And I hope what then comes back is how those benefits come back to Earth to benefit everyone down here. In both, like I kind of mentioned earlier, if you can take care of a human in space, you should be able to take care of that human anywhere on the planet as well. So this is a great question, and I think it made me kind of reframe how I think about it. Is maybe what we need is not just folks here in the STEM field, but artists and those of us that can try to communicate that grand endeavor. And this is where, like, you know, I look to folks like Eric and Jay who have been to space that give me that sense of awe. They've been there. They're trying to communicate it. I'm trying to take that perspective and stoke my wonder, stoke my awe, so I can try to come up with solutions and understand what's going on. And I would encourage everyone here that's hearing this to also take from what you're hearing today and how does that stoke your wonder and your awe and continue to propagate it.
Can you please join me in thanking the panel? Thank you very much. I might ask the panel to retake their seats at the front, if that's okay. And while they're doing that, I'd like to invite Mr. Madeline Ogilvie to make some closing remarks. And we're very happy to welcome her to this event.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. It's so good to be here. And I've come straight from Parliament where there's been a lot of talking, so I will try and perhaps just give you a few anecdotes and a little bit of love, particularly for the brain power which is clearly in the room. So for those who don't know me, I'm the Minister for Innovation, Science and the Digital Economy, also Environment and Climate Change. So this discussion is squarely in my wheelhouse as part of my ministerial responsibilities. But what people don't necessarily know is what I did before I came to politics. And I've had a really interesting career in and around science, research, technology and commercialisation. And I've done this all over the world. So I've worked for UNESCO, I worked in Indonesia doing the Suharto regime a long time ago. I'm CSIRO alumni, and I'm a lowly IP lawyer by trade. So I bring a slightly different perspective to this discussion. And I wanted to just tell you how proud I am to see this happening tonight in this room, in our beautiful state. And the Antarctic Division, what a triumph. I remember in 2020 when the decision was being made by our government about whether we get a hyperbaric chamber or whether we should spend the extra money and get a dual chamber, knowing that it would be, I think, the only one in the Southern Hemisphere, and therefore a unique asset that we could build upon. And as a newly elected and very lowly member of the opposition, I was a cheerleader for the then Minister Michael Ferguson, Minister for Science and Technology, and said, do it, do it, do it. because I'd recently been very fortunate to have gone to the States to visit a lot of space assets and research facilities, particularly in the West Coast. I'd lived in San Francisco during Y2K days, quite a long time before that. So it was great to go back to Stanford, go to visit JPL, see what was happening over there, but most importantly, to visit SpaceX, which was at that time on the West Coast. And I was just blown away. Somebody talked about getting the space bug. Well, that's when I got it. You know the moment you get it? So I think it was the chocolate chip cookie, which was still warm, and then seeing the rockets being built, which was phenomenal. And so I was asking questions. How do you do it? Why are you doing it? They talked about, who wants to go to Mars? Yeah, we want to go. Who wants to come back? Oh, yeah, we all want to come back. So how do we make that happen to bring the rockets back down? They talked about their engineering challenges. And I remember the smell in the room when they were welding the rockets together, which they then shipped on large trucks under bridges to get to Houston and Florida for sending up there. And I was speaking to one of the fellas who was working on this, and he was a pretty, serious-looking LA dude, a lot of tattoos, SpaceX T-shirt. And I said, how have you got involved in this? And he said, well, when they design the rockets, what they forgot about was they need people who can build the rockets. And so they looked to the automotive industry in LA, and they brought in the best welders, the best technicians, and these guys, and they were so proud of the work they were doing. And so one of the mantras that they started talking about, and I brought back with me to this day, I remember it, is that every dollar that's spent on space is actually spent on Earth. And there are opportunities here for that science and research and development. There are opportunities for industry development. So my career, I was very fortunate to be aligned with technology in much of my career, telecommunications, etc. So I thought I'd better get down to the university and find out what they're doing about space. And so I started with the astrophysicists, and they told me about the array of radio telescopes that we own nationally. It's a core piece of the array. It's incredible what we do here, the connection with SpaceX, which got me on that visit. And from there, I've made regular trips to the States. I've been to NASA Johnson. Somebody was talking about the neutral buoyancy lab. Yes, I've been there, amazing. Saw some of the astronauts coming out of that. And really wanted to underscore, I'm passionate about this area, but not only that, we as a state know that this is a future capability for Tasmania. We are very proud of our Antarctic division. Plus also we think we've got the right geography here for this work, which is always important. And our Antarctic gateway is incredibly important to us as well. From that decision to really invest in the dual purpose chamber came a lot more thinking about what we could do in this area. What would Tasmania's contribution to space and the mission to Mars be? So we as a state government put some money into startup businesses, innovative businesses. We've got companies like GeoNeon, which some of you will be aware of. We have Hensoldt, which is doing space situational awareness. And importantly, Peter Pad with his Fortify Edge, which is sort of, health sciences and sensor technology. His tech is already on the mission to Mars. So when we think about Tasmania, we think, oh, this quiet little island sitting safely and beautifully down the south of Australia. But actually what we've got is a really unique opportunity to maximise the potential that we have, both with our research capability, our global connections, and in particular, the ability to test and do things in Antarctica. And I'm renowned, of course, for whenever I go to one of the sites in the States, NASA Ames, I think was the last one I went to. They've got an amazing collaboration with the University of California that's just coming online, and their robotics for mission to the moon, I think, and then Mars. I'm seeing nods, the robotics. I said, come test them here. Bring them to Antarctica and let's see how they go, because of, it's obviously a great analogue for that work. So we get it as a state government. We want to see this build. We're so impressed with the work that you're doing. no doubt when we've done our budget repair, there will be more joy in relation to funding. But I wanted to encourage everybody, particularly students, to get involved, because there's nothing more exciting than thinking about a mission to Mars. Maybe we are the only life force in the galaxy, maybe we're not, but until we go, we won't know. So Godspeed to the astronauts, the engineers, the scientists, the technologists. Feel sorry for the lowly lawyers who have to stay here and work out how we're going to do some treaties and sort out copyright in space. Lots to occupy our minds as well. But I'm very grateful that I was invited tonight. I feel part of it, and I don't think I will ever get rid of the space bug. Once you've got it, you've just got it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ogilvie. So that brings an end to the program. But if you have an interest in what we've been talking about, which I hope you do because you've joined us here tonight, I'm very excited to say there's actually a story running on Tasmania's role in the space sector on 7:30 tonight on the ABC. Unfortunately, you'll probably have missed it because you've been here, but you can catch up on ABC iView. And I'd encourage you to do that. It's a really wonderful opportunity to also get some national press coverage on the great work that's being done here in Tasmania with the Australian Antarctic Division, the University of Tasmania, the Centre for Antarctic Remote and Maritime Medicine, and obviously the Department of Health and State Growth as well, and the collaboration with the Australasian Society of Aerospace Medicine as part of all that. Thank you very much for your time this evening, and I wish you well. Thank you.